Okay, welcome back to the garage. This is Ready, Set, Enjoy. My name's Connor. Today we're talking about the Winter Wilderness Survival course that I just completed this past weekend, and I think we got a lot to talk about. Oh, it's cold in the garage today, so I've got some coffee. By the time you've watched this, Valentine's Day will have come and passed, so happy belated Valentine's Day, I suppose. I think it's time to get into it. We're going to talk about the course, what we covered, what we did, and then we'll talk about what went well, what I learned, and what I'm going to do differently next time. We're also going to go through some significant info about the gear that I was using, and I'll just give you an update on what I used, what I didn't use, and some of the things that I found interesting, because there was actually a surprise or two just from the gear category. So let's dive into it. Starting with the course itself, it was a 48-hour ordeal. We had to set up camp. We had to, start fire. We learned a bunch about, warmth strategies, about how to make different types of winter-specific shelters, and all of the things that you need to do in winter that you may not necessarily need to do in the warmer months. The course was hosted by WSC Survival School here in Ontario, and the course was held at their Marble Lake property, which was 300 acres that they own and maintain. They run different courses out of there. There's also camping and some other stuff that they run there. We happened to do it on the coldest weekend in February, and winter in Ontario is not to be trifled with. If you've ever experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. So it did go down to negative 36 degrees Celsius with the wind chill, and despite that, I think it went pretty darn well. I did learn a fair bit. But the biggest thing for me, honestly, was the fact that it was a confidence booster. I didn't gain any mind-blowing knowledge. It's not like there was anything absolutely unheard of. I don't think that there was anything I hadn't already, heard on a YouTube video or wherever else. But it was the fact that we were able to actually apply that knowledge in a controlled setting where there was, safety backups and instructors there to help. And I went from being pretty anxious about the whole thing, wondering if I was going to be miserable and cold the whole time, to actually coming out the other side feeling a lot more confident in my abilities and my knowledge and my skills. So that for me was the best part. So let's get into, what went well, what I learned, and what I would do next time. So in terms of what we learned in the course, we started out with things like warmth strategies, so different types of clothing, different types of sleep systems. We did things like a space blanket demonstration. We talked about ways that you can use the snow to your advantage to block wind, to help in building your shelter, and even building an entire shelter just out of snow. One of the things we did on the first day was build a snow hut, or I think he called it a quincy. So this was essentially a big pile of snow that we all pitched in. We dug a significant, mound. Maybe it was 7 or 8 feet high, and then we took turns carving out the inside of that mound. We let it freeze for an hour or two, and then we carved out the inside. We poked a couple of air holes, and that was a shelter. And one person did opt to, in fact, sleep in the quincy, and they reportedly had a pretty good time with it. They reported being a little bit claustrophobic to begin with, but then it wasn't so bad after that. We also covered a bit of a snowshoe section. So the instructor had a pretty wide variety of different snowshoes for us to all try, including some created by indigenous tribes. So there was an Ojibwe style snowshoe, and he showed us how to properly lash it. and they have someone on their staff who apparently makes them, and that was really quite interesting. And we also went over different kinds of boots and just ways to ensure you stay dry. When should you change your socks? When should you pick, a big Arctic boot or a muckluck over some other kind? Each of the people who were taking the course kind of reviewed their own boots. We had one or two people who weren't quite up to up to snuff in the boot category, but I think I chose decently well. I brought my Timberland Pro work boots with 400 grams of Thinsulate, and they served me pretty well throughout the weekend. Next, we went through, the priorities when it comes to setting up camp, and then we also covered some fire starting mechanisms. So in terms of priorities, we learned about, first of all, you need to ensure you're in a safe area. No widowmaker branch is going to fall and kill you. And then choosing, the right set of trees to hang your tarp from, how much wood you need to collect, what order you need to do things in, making sure that you get your fire started fairly early and build up a good base of coals for cooking and whatnot later on in the day. And then, protection from the wind, protection from the elements, and then setting up your sleeping arrangements for the evening, cooking your food. If you have to go doing foraging and stuff like that, obviously you have to fit that in there. We didn't have time for that this weekend, but it was nice to just hear somebody who's done this a couple of times lay out how you should be thinking about setting up camp. And then we all went out and did it, which was really nice, nice to do it as a group. Since it was going to be so cold, the instructors opted for at least the option for a hot tent as the accommodations for the nights. That is what I ended up choosing. The instructors went over, hot tent setup, hot tent safety. We had two different kinds of hot tents. We had like a dome style, which I think was a Bear, some kind of, I don't remember the brand name. It was something Bear. And then we also had a kind of cone teepee style hot tent, one of which had a really fancy, expensive titanium stove, and the other one had like an old kind of piece of crap, rusty steel stove. And so then we went as a group and we set these tents up. We also set up kind of a tarp-based shelter, and then kind of created a communal fire and kind of hangout / cooking space together. And then also a non-hot tent it's a 4-season tent. It was insulated, and it kind of had an outer tent and an inner tent, but it didn't have a wood stove. So one person did opt to sleep in that, and they said they were cold, but fine, right? They had a really good sleeping bag, and so it all ended up being fine for them. And then we spent quite a bit of time collecting firewood and processing firewood, and then, by the time we were ready to go, it was getting dark. We all cooked our meals. We spent some time just, hanging out around the fire, and then we spent the night. So in terms of the nights, I was supposed to have a tent mate. It was supposed to be me and one other person in the teepee-shaped hot tent. Turns out that tent mate person, he did not select a good sleeping bag for the weekend, and his sleep system in general was not up to snuff. Within an hour of the evening, he decided to opt out of sleeping outside because turns out he brought a sleeping bag that was rated for the summer. So I think it was like a plus 10 degrees sleeping bag, and he hadn't brought sufficient underpad. He had just one fleece blanket as an underpad, and when we go into my sleep system, I think you'll see the difference, but he decided to opt out, so I actually ended up having the tent all to myself. And then there was even one fella who decided to just sleep outside in the tarp shelter, and he had an underpad, he had a space blanket that was like a space bivvy wrapped around his sleeping bag, then his sleeping bag, then he had an emergency poncho, and then his clothes. And he said he slept really well, even though it was minus 36 with the wind chill, and he was just sleeping next to the communal fire on some pine boughs. You know, he had a good time. I kind of regret not picking that choice. It would have been really, cool to go the, tough it out version. This fella obviously had a little bit more gumption than me, but I did enjoy the hot tent experience. So, it's not a big regret, but I think it was really cool to see the different variations of, who slept where and how their nights went. Okay, so let's start with what went well. I'm going to try to go through these sections relatively quickly. Otherwise, this video is going to be an hour long. So let's start with my sleep system. This is under the what went well category because I was pretty darn comfortable. My sleep system consisted of kind of 4 parts, and I'll show them each to you here. So first of all, we were sleeping just right on the snow. So the first layer that went down was a tarp. So I had just a Canadian Tire tarp that was folded, twice over. And then on top of that, I put my closed cell foam sleeping pad. This is, I believe, Thermarest brand, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Thermarest Z-Lite. So this is, I think, just something we got at Cabela's. It does fold up nice and small. I had this strapped to my pack. So that goes on top of the tarp. And then on top of that, I had this Hudson's Bay wool blanket. This is something that actually my wife inherited from her grandparents. So this is like one of the real old Hudson's Bay blankets that went just underneath my sleeping bag. And I did kind of fold it up over my feet as well, which helped keep the toes warm. And then on top of the blanket, I had my sleeping bag. So this is the Mountain Hardwear Bishop's Pass. It is rated for comfort at minus 18. The operating limit is technically minus 18, but then the extreme rating, what they call extreme, is minus 38 Celsius. So this was obviously wrapped around me. The sleeping bag, it's kind of a mummy style. So your feet are kept close together and there's a little bit more room around the shoulders. I've used the sleeping bag a number of times in a couple of different types of conditions over the years, and I already knew that it was a good quality bag, and I let it loft for a couple of hours before bed so that the down was nice and loose, and it worked really well. The last part of my sleep system was this good old-fashioned, your back is hurting, hot water bottle. So before bed, I heated up some water, not quite to boiling, but steaming hot. Put it in this bottle, and then like 20 minutes before bed, I put this into the sleeping bag. And then when I got in, I kind of moved it in between, I had it between my knees, and I had it around my feet area, and it just added a significant extra bit of warmth to the bag. And I'm really glad that I brought this. This is a trick that I don't remember where I learned it, but I've done it a couple times now during shoulder season camping. And honestly, I wouldn't go without it at this point. It's really, really, really useful. The next thing on the what went well list was the cook system that I brought. So this was the first time I've used this system. This is a 2-liter Sea to Summit aluminum kick pot with a locking lid and a detachable handle. And then along with it, there was, it comes with an insulated kind of coffee mug situation. See if I can balance this. And it also comes with a bowl. I also got just an aluminum spork, and I also opted to bring this camping pour over, which you might have seen in my packing video. So this is how I made coffee. Worked out decently well. Not the best coffee I've ever had, but no complaints. So all of this basically went off without a hitch. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. It worked really well, and the handle being able to come off ensures that it doesn't get too hot. and then it all packs back into this with the handle kind of keeping the lid closed. So overall, yeah, quite happy with it. The next thing on my what went well list were my two main tools that I used. So I opted for the tried and true Silky Gomboy as my saw. So I cut down a ton of building material for our tarp shelter, and I processed a bunch of firewood and cut a ton of pine boughs for our communal area. And this, I've had the saw for 2 years, and I never had any doubts about it, but it was probably my most used tool when I was out there. And then I also opted to bring the Schwarz Knives LT5. This was a first time test for me. So it's a A2 steel 5-inch camp knife. And I was just so thoroughly impressed with this knife, to be honest with you. I used it for pretty much everything. I cut kindling, I did batoning, I was chopping small branches off of larger limbs that we wanted to use. I used it to strike my ferro rod, I used it to create shavings for tinder, and it did great at all of those things. I will do a full review of this knife eventually because of how impressed I am with it, and I am just really glad that I chose to do a knife test for this trip. And yeah, let's talk about the bag too. So the chest rig, there was a video on that, so if you want to see all the details, go check that one out. But I would also file this under the what went well category. It was extremely convenient to have all of my quick access stuff right there on my chest. There were a couple of folks who had kind of more of a bushcraft belt setup, and then there were a couple of people who didn't have any kind of setup at all, really, which is fine. It's a learning opportunity. Not everybody is as big of a gear nerd as I am, but I am really glad that I went with this rig. It was comfortable. It was not very heavy. I didn't feel fatigued by it. I was able to get it to just the right tightness where it wasn't swinging around. Easy to put on and off, and the organization worked really well. So overall, I'm quite satisfied with this marsupial gear multi-pack that I used as a bushcraft chest rig. So next up is kind of just warmth in general. I would put warmth under the what went well category because at no point over the weekend did I get to the point of shivering. I was never really cold. There was obviously some cold extremities here and there, but I mostly lend the success of the weekend to two main things. One is these overalls. So these are the Patagonia Iron Forge insulated work overalls. And then also my boots, which I already mentioned, the Timberland Pro 400 gram insulated boots. The best part about that combo is that no snow got in my boots whatsoever. I never had that issue. There was other people who had, just kind of snow pants, like ski pants, and they had issues with snow in their boots. They had to go into the tent a couple of times to switch socks and whatnot, but I never had that problem. It also kept my core really warm, and so I never felt any, cold issues whatsoever. And then the extra bonus is that I kept my phone in this zippered pocket, and that kept it nice and warm right next to my body, which meant that the battery didn't really die very quickly. And so my phone on low battery mode was able to last the whole weekend, which was a bonus. Also in the warmth category was these overmitts that I bought kind of almost in a panic just before the trip, to be honest with you. So these are some gigantic, fully leather insulated gloves that fit over top of my ski mitts. And these were great just while I was waiting for stuff. So while I was waiting for water to boil, while I was waiting for my food to cook, while I was waiting for somebody else to finish something, I would slip these on over my gloves, and it actually really helped in keeping the cold off of my fingers. And I'm really glad that I, brought these. I don't think it would have been a huge problem if I didn't have them, but it was just that extra layer of comfort that made things really enjoyable. So I'm glad I picked these up, and they were only $50 at Canadian Tire. They're Combi brand, and yeah, I would recommend. Only the first time I've used them, but I'm quite happy with them. Let's get into the what I learned portion. So for this category, it wasn't necessarily anything that went catastrophically wrong, because nothing really went horribly wrong. And that's why I didn't label this category what went wrong, which I would normally do in a retrospective at work or something like that. I chose what I learned because it's mostly just, improvements, subtle things that I think can happen, or subtle differences that I learned that I think is important to know. So the first was I didn't process nearly enough small firewood for the hot tent. When I went to bed, I had, a small bundle of kindling. I had extra tinder in case I needed to restart it in the night. But then the vast majority of my firewood, 85 to 90% of the firewood I had in the tent for the hot stove was, quartered logs, so fairly large. They were all the right length and whatnot, but I didn't process nearly enough of the small kindling. And the way that manifested was at 3 a.m., I had set myself 90-minute timers to restock the stove. I ended up extending that to 2 hours because the first 2 or 3 90-minute sessions, the fire was still going, and so I thought that I could let it go a little bit longer. But then when I bumped it up to 2 hours, turns out that was maybe a little bit too long, because when I came back, there were still some coals, there was still a little bit of ember going at the bottom, but the fire had mostly gone out. And because I had used up my smaller kindling by then, all I had was tinder and larger pieces. And so I had to spend probably 10 to 15 minutes in the tent at night. First, I tried to just use, the tinder and the larger pieces and just blowing on it to try to get it restarted. And when that was fruitless and I got a bunch of smoke in the tent, I then had to spend, a couple of minutes batoning some kindling to get that fire going again. And that was a pain in the butt. I had to get out of my sleeping bag. The tent was still probably above 0 inside, but I was a bit chilly. Never to the point, again, of shivering, but, it did take an extra probably 10 minutes that I otherwise wouldn't have had to do if I had processed enough small kindling before bed. So that was the first thing that I learned. The next thing that I learned, which I kind of already knew, but in this way I kind of viscerally learned it, is that multiple fire starting techniques are key. So at that 3 a.m. wake up, when I needed to restart the fire, I first tried these stormproof matches. And I'm not sure if it was dumb luck. I'm going to try again here to see if it was just dumb, bad luck. But I cannot get these damn things to light for some reason. Even now, when I'm not, in a bit of a frantic state trying to get a fire going when I'm freezing, I still can't get these damn things to light here in my garage. So I was a bit disappointed by these stormproof matches. I don't know if I did something wrong. I don't know if it's user error or whatever, but I just broke it. But I could not get these stormproof matches to light. And so, I needed to revert to a backup method. And that backup method was my ferro rod, but having multiple fire starting options is really, really important. So yeah, the ferro rod ended up being the winner of the weekend. I was able to start multiple fires with very little issue, with actually 2 different types of tinder. One was, just wood shavings, especially some nice cedar shavings, and the other were these cotton-soaked tinder starters from Exotech. They worked pretty well also. The next thing that I learned is that melting snow takes a long time. So multiple times throughout the afternoon and the evening, I grabbed some fresh snow to melt down to drink and to put into my hot water bottle. And it takes a lot longer than you'd think. Even on a hot fire that had been roaring for hours, it still took, 15 to 20 minutes to get a full, pot of melted snow going. And so, I think bringing more water along, I only brought one Nalgene of fresh water from home to go on the trip with. And I think if I would do it over, I would bring more. Related to that, I learned that water in minus 30 plus Celsius weather freezes a lot faster than you think it would. So I had kept my Nalgene, my original water plus any water or any snow that I melted and put into the bottle. I was just kind of keeping it in the side pocket of my pack so that I wouldn't misplace it. But then even after just an hour or an hour and a half, the water would already start to freeze. And so I learned that it's a good idea to maybe, and this is honestly one of the main reasons I brought this bottle, is that it is single wall aluminum. I kept this not in the fire, but about a foot away from the fire for the morning after I learned this lesson, so that the water wouldn't be hot, but it also wouldn't freeze. Staying on the topic of water, dehydration in the winter is real. I knew this. I was also warned this by the instructors, but I still didn't drink enough water. I still didn't stay well enough hydrated. And by the end of the course, I was feeling it and my urine was showing it, let me say that. So drink more water than you think. I think it's a fairly well-known phenomenon that in the winter, you don't feel necessarily thirsty, but you are sweating more than you think. You're probably exerting more than you usually do. And so you should probably drink twice as much water as you feel you need to keep up with that hydration. And so that's another thing that I kind of knew intellectually, but actually experienced for real and experienced it viscerally myself. And so it was a really good thing to actually experience. The next thing on the learning list is lumpy snow is not comfortable to sleep on. And this was something that I kind of rushed through when we were setting up the hot tents, is I didn't spend enough time flattening out the surface. We kind of dug it out, right? And we made a large enough area for the teepee tent to go up. But I didn't spend enough time actually worrying about the surface inside the tent, because there's no floor on this tent and we were sleeping directly on the snow. And by the time I actually went to bed and was kind of wiggling around trying to get comfortable, the hot tent, the stove had already cycled once or twice. It had gotten really hot and then we let it cool off and then it got really hot again and then it cooled off. So the top layer of the snow inside the tent had already kind of semi-frozen, and there was a lump in my back that was unfortunate. I was able to kind of move to a slightly different position, so it wasn't so bad, but if I could impart something, it would be really take the time to do the prep for your sleeping situation, because it will lead to a better sleep. I probably lost, 10% of my sleeping hours just moving around and trying to find a comfortable spot because of that frozen lump of snow that I couldn't get out of the way. The next thing that I learned is that a hatchet might not be as essential as I once thought. I brought this small forest axe with me on the trip, and the only use it got was loaning it to somebody else who hadn't brought any tools with them. I do love this tool, and I have used it in the past, but now that I have a camp knife that is able to do a lot of the tasks that this guy can handle, I never actually needed it myself. which was surprising. And I'd like to know, maybe leave a comment what you think, camp knife versus hatchet when it comes to, bushcraft and lightweight camping. But this guy was able to do all of the things that I needed it to do. And so this guy was loaned out and I didn't actually end up using it. The blade is larger. Batoning is a very effective technique. I'm sure I could have done all the same things with this, but this was more quick access. Like I had it right there on my rig. And so I just reached for the knife and didn't end up using the hatchet. So let me know what you think about that. Nice big camp knife versus a hatchet. Do you need both? Would you prefer one or the other? Let me know in the comments. I learned how really truly effective spruce and pine boughs are at keeping you warm. This was something that, again, I've seen this on the internet and whatnot, but I didn't actually, again, experience the effects of it until this course. And so we had our central hangout area, and one of the other participants suggested that we do this. We put kind of a semicircle of pine boughs or spruce boughs around the campfire for us to hang out on. And it makes a big difference. And not just for sitting down, but also for standing, right? Like if you're standing around on the snow or on the ice, it is sucking heat out of the bottom of your boot. And it might be a good boot, and so it doesn't, create a big problem, but all the warmth that you can keep, the better, right? And so by standing and sitting and kneeling on these boughs instead of right on the snow or having to move a pad around, especially close to the fire, I was really quite impressed with how effective that actually was. And so that's something that I will definitely be bringing into future trips, is prioritizing a little bit of comfort and warmth by using just branches off a tree. The last thing that I'll put in this category of learning is the night during winter is really long. So part of my evening after folks had kind of packed up and gone to bed was just boredom. I kind of wish I had something to do. And I think, if you were doing a more extended trip, you might use that time for some bushcraft projects that you can do, in your tent. Maybe you would, carve a bowl or a spoon, or, make some tent pegs, or, do something that just involves whittling or carving. But I wish I had thought of and prepared to do some kind of project after dark in the tent, especially after my tent mate left. It was still only 9 o'clock. I wasn't, ready to sleep. I was tired, but I wasn't ready to sleep because it was only 9. And so, yeah, I wish I had figured out some way to entertain myself. I, used up that time kind of just taking some notes and making sure that I fully absorbed all the information and the experiences from the day, so that I could, obviously for myself, but also so that I could record this video after the fact. But yeah, having some kind of activity to do would be really nice. Okay, so getting into the what will I be changing category. The first thing on the list is I talked in my packing video about how I was tethering my flashlight, my handheld flashlight, to my chest rig with that flexible tether that came with the pack. And I still think that would be a prudent thing to do, but turns out the more prudent thing to do was using that to tether my ferro rod, because more than once I dropped it in the snow. Luckily, I was kneeling making a fire, and so I was able to, grab it pretty easily. But if that had happened when I was walking, or if the snow was more powdery and deep, then that could be a pretty bad situation. The front pocket of the chest rig did fit the ferro rod nicely, but it wasn't tight enough to really hold onto it. And so I could see a scenario where I lose the ferrule rod, and then there's one of your fire starting methods down the drain. So I'll be tethering that ferrule rod from now on to avoid losing it. The next thing I'll be changing is strike beef jerky from the menu. I think I understand the theoretical appeal to it. You know, it's a lot of protein, and you know, it tastes decently good. It keeps for a long time. You don't need to cook it, but unfortunately, it's too damn salty. It made me so thirsty to eat that beef jerky. It wasn't bad actually when I mixed it in with my Uncle Ben's rice for dinner, but just eating it as a snack that you occasionally, you know, pull out of your bag in between jobs on the campsite, it just wasn't working for me. It made me so thirsty. So if there's another brand that isn't Kirkland that maybe isn't so salty and thirst inducing, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I will not be having any more beef jerky on these kinds of trips. This next one is actually a piece of gear that one of the instructors showed me that I think I'll be picking up for my kit, and that is a tarp that is made by Mountain Equipment Co-op that is coated on one side with silicone, kind of like you would, you know, oven mitts or whatever. And so that makes it resistant to sparks and heat. And so we were able to use that tarp to build a shelter over a campfire without worrying too much about the sparks burning holes in our shelter. So that was something I'd never heard of. Thought it was a really good idea. Apparently it's a bit expensive. And if I do pick one up, I will make sure to maybe do a little demo on the channel. But I think I'm going to be adding that to my kit. And yeah, I was really impressed by that. One thing I'll be doing differently in terms of my light source is I'm going to default to my headlamp. I was trying to default to my handheld light because it was so easily accessible right on the front of my rig. But in the end, it's just so convenient to have your hands free that I eventually busted out the headlamp and used that for the rest of the time. I think that's just going to be my default going forwards. It's a little bit less, you know, convenient, I guess, to put it on and off, and like when you're not using it, you kind of have to like hang it on your wrist or whatever. But you know, the utility of it when you're actually using it is just so much better. And I really like the headlamp that I have. It's a Petzl headlamp with a rechargeable USB battery. And so yeah, I think I'll be changing my lighting strategy a bit and defaulting to the headlamp from here on out. Now I kind of presumed that this was going to be the case going into it, but I'm going to need to use a bigger pack. This will be, it's unfortunate because I'm not really somebody who's into backpacking or even long range hiking. I don't really enjoy hiking that much, unless it's, you know, really easy trail. But I was using this pack. It's a Mech 45 liter bag. It's my wife's actually. I mentioned that in the packing video. She used to lead canoe trips and hiking trips in her younger years, and so I use this because it's a very good pack. It, you know, has a lot of good space for, you know, probably summer gear, but for the winter it was not sufficient. And I also found that it didn't have very good lash points, or not enough lash points. So when I had this loaded out, I had my sleeping bag, my extra clothes, and my cook system in this main pocket, which pretty much filled it up. I had my food in this outer pocket. I had an Nalgene in one side pocket, and then I had my silky saw and my hatchet in the other side pocket. Then I had my foam pad, my closed self-insulated pad, lashed to the front just with these tether points on the bag and some paracord. But then my wool blanket and my tarp didn't really have anything to attach to because there's no bottom attachment points and there isn't a very good top attachment point on this bag. And so what I ended up doing, since the hike we went on to get to our campsite wasn't very long, I wrapped the wool blanket in the tarp, and then I kind of made, I used paracord to just tie it like a present basically, and then I just carried it by the paracord, which wouldn't have worked if our hike was any longer than it was. As it was only about a 20-minute hike to get where we were going. But yeah, so going forward, if I am going to do this on a regular basis, even though I'm not a big backpacker or hiker, and I don't really feel that I can justify paying a bunch of money for a big, expensive pack, if I am going to do this winter camping thing on a regular basis, I am going to need something a bit bigger. The only piece of kit that I think I was actually missing was a shovel, and I intentionally did not bring one because I did not think I would need it, which in retrospect was kind of a crazy thought. I kind of assumed that the instructors would provide them, and they did, but it was a bit crazy of me to go winter camping without a shovel. I even have a nice collapsible aluminum avalanche shovel that I could have brought, but I didn't. So that was a bit silly. I think that was my only, oversight. Like I said, the instructors provided shovels for us, and so it wasn't that big of a deal. Nobody else brought their own shovel either, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. But I would definitely bring a small collapsible shovel going forward. The next thing I will be doing differently going forward is having some way of tethering my gloves to my jacket or to my chest rig or something, especially those over mitts that I am pretty much constantly taking on and off because you can't really do many tasks with those big gloves on. So having some reliable and easy way to tether your gloves to yourself, I think is going to be critical. Maybe it'll just be paracord. Maybe I'll do the, like they do for young kids, where it's basically a string that goes through the back of your jacket and then the gloves kind of just dangle off of the sleeves. I think that would honestly work really well. So I think I'm going to have to implement something like that for my gloves going forward, because it was just really inconvenient to, put them in my pack, take them out of my pack, put them somewhere, you forget where you put them, you got to go find them. It was just annoying. So that's definitely something that I can improve. And the last item in the what I will be doing differently category is I feel the need for something as an alternative to a balaclava. I have a merino wool balaclava. That's what I used. And I also had a fleece neck warmer on at the same time. And the balaclava, it just by its nature collects so much moisture, condensation from your breath. And if you take it off for even a few minutes, that condensation will freeze. And then when you put it back on, it's very, very uncomfortable. So I don't know actually what a good alternative is. Maybe it's a scarf, maybe it's a handkerchief. I don't know. I need your help. So if you have a good alternative to a balaclava for super, super cold, please let me know. I'm all ears. I don't know if the condensation problem even can be fixed, but if it can, I would like to know about it. So please leave a comment. Let me know what you think I should do there. And that just about wraps it up for my winter survival training debriefing. I hope that you learned something. I know I did. I would really like to go back out sometime in the late winter, kind of when it's transitioning over into spring, maybe around the middle of March, and do a solo winter camp when it's not so cold, when it's maybe in the -5 to -10 Celsius range, and see about doing this by myself, apply what I've learned to actually go and accomplish some of these things on my own without the safety net of instructors and cabins a 20-minute walk away. I think that would be good for me. You want to see one, do one, teach one. So I've seen it. Now I need to do it, and then hopefully I can teach you about it as well. This is something that I really want to learn more about. I want to improve my skills. I want to improve my own knowledge, and I want to continue to test my gear in real world scenarios, because there's absolutely no use in owning an expensive hatchet or knife or sleeping bag or tent if you don't go out there and prove that you actually have the skills to use it. So yeah, I'm hoping to set something like that up in the next couple of months, and let me know what you would like to see, what kinds of survival scenarios may be interesting to you. I know there's a lot of bushcraft and survival stuff here on YouTube. I want to focus more on, how you can prepare yourself, your body, your mind, your gear, your vehicle for these types of scenarios, and not necessarily just do a day in the life of bushcraft like a lot of other people do. But, I'd love to know what you think. But in the meantime, that's going to be all for today. So I think you know what I'm going to say. Stay ready, get set, and go enjoy your life. See ya.